50 and older spend half their income on rent. Additionally, by one estimate, we're 156,000 housing units short of meeting the housing needs of our older generation, and that's by next year. This trend's only going to accelerate as our population ages. We are drifting towards what you might characterize as a senior housing crisis within a larger housing crisis. Now, there are a number of reasons for this. I'm always skeptical of citing one cause for particular challenges. I wouldn't regard this as a partisan issue. It's only political to the extent that you hear about it weaponized. We need to solve this. Collectively, we need to solve this through public policy as market solutions are also brought to bear. In a lot of instances, however, the shortage is a result of policy. It's a result of many cities and towns that have outdated restrictive zoning laws and land use policies. These regulatory restrictions, these artificial restrictions on supply, drive up prices. There are arbitrary occupancy limits. There are inflexible design demands. Now, there's a rationale, sometimes a legitimate rationale or a defensible rationale for these limitations. But with that said, there's a cost and there's a benefit to these sorts of limits and demand restrictions. They needlessly complicate and they also prolong permitting processes. These collectively, all of these various rules constitute a system of red tape that drive up costs and discourage construction. In fact, to get to numbers, burdensome regulations account for roughly 40% of the cost for multifamily developments nationally. 40%, just on account of regulations. So our primary goal, as I see it, should be to eliminate unnecessary, less defensible paper barriers and replace them with pro-growth land use policies, pro-housing policies. This is the goal of bipartisan legislation that I have introduced in Congress. It's called the Yes in My Backyard Act, or the YIMBY Act, for those enamored of acronyms. The YIMBY Act will encourage localities to eliminate burdensome and discriminatory zoning and land use policies without prescribing particular solutions. The bill would also increase transparency in land use and zoning decisions, ultimately helping localities to eliminate the barriers to much needed housing in their own geographies. Now, rather than remedy the housing crisis with federal subsidies or additional red tape, the YIMBY Act proposes instead shining sunlight on these restrictions, this constellation of red tape that blocks the construction of new inventory. My proposal would encourage transparency, something all Americans like, and respect the rights of states and cities in setting their own zoning policies, something that is very important to so many Americans, while at the same time incentivizing pro-housing regulations. So what's not to like? Very little. I'll leave it to others to identify reasons they may not like it, but I have to say this has been a broadly bipartisan effort. It's been very popular. It's been endorsed by constituencies that are regarded as on the right or on the left in the political spectrum. And so we think that this is something that ought to be rushed to the finish line as we approach year's end. And that's where all of you come in, because this is one of these rare areas of sensible policy making that has an opportunity of becoming law as we approach year's end, but it will only do so by my lights if we have the continued support of AARP and of their members, lighten up the phones, approaching members of Congress, sending missives through the internet or through the mail to congressional offices and saying, let's go, Congress, time to get to work once the elections are over, and include this piece of legislation in one of the many packages that I expect will reach the president's desk as we approach year's end. So thank you for the audience. I do not intend to filibuster on this Zoom conversation. I'd love to open it up for whatever questions you may have of me. Thank you, Sarah. Back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Senator Young. For those of you that are just joining, my name is Sarah Waddle, and I'm the State Director for AARP in Indiana. And we're talking with Senator Todd Young about housing. We're here to discuss some legislation that he has sponsored. You heard him mention the YIMBY Act, which is a piece of legislation that AARP endorses. And he's here to take your questions. So you can press *3 on your telephone keypad to get your question in the queue. If you're out there in virtual Facebook, YouTube land, you can put your question in the comments and we'll try to get to that. Senator, just to kind of get us kicked off here, you have a big passion for housing issues, and I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit more about why housing matters to you. It just seems to be an issue that you engage on in a lot of aspects, and it's a wonderful thing to see. And we're just curious a little bit more about where that passion might come from.
Well, thank you, Sarah. When I ran for the Senate, I was very familiar with the congressional district I had represented for 6 years. And in fact, as I traveled around, people frequently tell me they saw more of me than their city council members or their mayors. And I really aspired to get to know the state of Indiana and the issues that were important to folks. And then I resolved, to the extent I learned about new issues, which you naturally do, to work very diligently on those issues. And one of the things I heard time and again around the state, regardless of geography, out in the country, in the cities, north, south, east, west, central, was about housing affordability challenges. And I worked hard to sort of diagnose why these challenges existed. Free markets are supposed to work. And there were a number of reasons that I pinned down. One was the financial crisis. We saw a lot of smaller contractors with fewer resources go out of business, so there weren't enough people to build houses. We had some public policies that I thought could be improved at the federal level, but I have to say the biggest challenge I encountered were just state and local land use policies. And it was frustrating to me because I believe in respecting the prerogatives, the lawmaking authority of local officials. And I don't think it's the federal government's job to operate in that area. So I found a way through the YIMBY Act not to prescriptively tell municipalities what they had to do, but insist that they bring transparency to their zoning and land use decisions, not just for those developers and very active citizens who are able to attend zoning meetings and what have you, but instead in a more formalized way. And so we've created a reporting requirement, to get a little more specific, for municipalities that choose to receive federal community development block grant funds, which is typically a very important funding tool for municipalities. And this has proven to be something that city leaders, those who work in our towns, are happy to comply with. They're happy to defend their local land use and zoning regulations as long as we're not telling them what to do. And we think that we can lead to more informed citizens and more intentional decision making from our local officials by coming up with this mechanism. So that was the YIMBY Act. But as you know, Sarah, and just to close out my answer here, I've offered some other solutions as well. I know that this little mechanism won't be enough. So I think we need more low-income housing tax credit properties. This is the leading public-private partnership program to build workforce housing in this country, and it's been very successful. Of course, when you lower tax rates, tax credits become less valuable, and we needed to account for the recent lowering of tax rates by making that program more generous, which I'm working on. And then I've got another sort of creative program designed much like the Opportunity Zone program, in which people who reside within these zones, this is the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act program, have the opportunity to um, rehab their own house if it's fallen into great disrepair, or even to acquire blighted homes and rehab those homes and then turn around and sell them to others. Of course, traditionally, in those cases, there has been a value gap between the amount of money you put in and the amount of money you can sell that improved property for in the back end. We've created a tax credit within these designated zones to fill that value gap. And we're getting a lot of national interest from that legislation as well. So that's how I this came to be a big priority for me, Sarah, and those are some of the major solutions I put forward.
I think it's very helpful for all of us to hear that and hear where your passions lie and where they come from. And believe it or not, we got a couple questions here that we're going to get to. We've got 3 minutes here for you. And I'm going to go
Okay.
to Lynn in Columbus, Indiana. Lynn, do I have you on the line?
Yes, you do.
Hi, Lynn. What is your question for Senator Young?
I have a question regarding the green spaces that we currently have in our systems, cities and what have you. Does lifting the restrictions that you're talking about lose some of the green space that we need?
Thank you so much, Lynn. Excellent question. No, I personally, I love to live in places with beautiful green spaces. I'm literally I'm a greenie. I'm a parks fanatic, and I think it's quite important to at the local level for these things to be prioritized. But that's a local decision. And so that's why we've come up with this mechanism for bringing transparency to local land use and zoning decisions. Is as long as one can defend set aside of green space, as I just did in short form, then there's no problem whatsoever. If instead a locality elects not to defend its land use decisions, then they wouldn't receive community development block grant monies. I can't imagine any locality would take that position, however.
Very good. All right, real quick, I'm going to go to Barbara in Brookville. Barbara, do I have you on the line?
Yes, ma'am.
Barbara, what's your question this morning?
I would like to know what you can do to help the senior citizens that own their own home. I've been here 34 years. I live out in the country. My property taxes have skyrocketed because it's been overvalued falsely. I'm told that because of increased value of property from property sales, that's why my taxes have gone up, which is completely false because nothing has sold in my direct area, yet my property taxes have quadrupled.
Oh, that was my bad. I think that I hit the button. Barbara, I'm sorry, but I think we got the gist of your question.
Yeah.
Property taxes. I know this is a
No,
state
that's
issue.
all right. I'll take a stab at this one. It sounds complex to me, and acknowledging the complexity of it, and taking my best shot at it. I think if I were in her circumstances, and she may have already done this, I certainly would seek another assessment of my property if she's asked a private assessor to come in and give a property tax assessment. There are local circumstances there. If in fact, really her property value is increasing as she is hearing from her neighbors or others on account of local land use decisions or acquisition of lands, it seems to me that that comes right down to land use and zoning policy. If and those issues need to be made transparent. That's what the YIMBY Act does. We think it'll lead to more housing. I think that that's a good thing as we're looking to alleviate the housing affordability crisis.
Senator, we know you have to run. We know you have a very important event that you have to get to at 11. So we're going to let you go. But before you leave, anything you want to say before you head out?
Well, I want to thank you again, Sarah. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. And I realize this was somewhat tight. So if you have any follow-up questions or interest in these policies or other housing affordability policies, you can access my website at young.senate.gov. And we'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, you can register those through the website as well about this or any other matter. Thank you for the opportunity to represent you and say some words today, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you so much, Senator. Have a good rest of your day. And for those of you that are still on the line, don't go anywhere. We have AARP's government affairs representative with us that works on our federal housing issues, Deborah Alvarez. And so we're going to talk with her for the remainder of our time together today, which is just a few more minutes here. But Deborah, do I have you with us? Just want to make sure you're still there. There she is. Hi, Deborah.
Hi, Sarah.
Deborah, hi. You heard from the senator today where he was talking about the YIMBY Act, which is a piece of legislation that AARP has endorsed. Can you talk about a little bit of AARP's perspective of why the YIMBY Act is a good thing?
Yes, of course. The points that the senator made, and we're so grateful for his leadership on this, are really valid. Older adults are spending, more than their cost burden to a higher extent than they have ever been. Income's just not meeting what their expenses are. And having the ability to have more flexibility in building, allowing greater variety of housing other than strictly single-family homes can really help to increase affordable housing, can help neighborhoods to keep the younger people living in there, keep workforce persons living in those neighborhoods. We see this as a first step in removing the barriers to housing, and we're looking forward to having national data over time as we get more reporting on how these policies are being implemented. This bill was marked up unanimously in the House Financial Services Committee in May, and right now we're working to try to get it sent to the floor of the House through a suspension calendar, which is reserved for legislation that isn't controversial. This has really strong support in the House, bipartisan support in both the House and Senate. So we are going to be working to see if we can get some movement on this before the end of the year.
That was going to be my question. There's that election thing that's happening, and people are kind of, they have their attention elsewhere, but they will come back after the election and maybe do some work.
Yes, that's the expectation.
Good. Well, and maybe that's more reason for us and all of you who are listening today to make sure that we're sending those emails and making those phone calls that Senator Young mentioned, to make sure that this gets some movement and continues to be discussed. Deborah, while we have you on, I'm just curious if there's any other piece of housing legislation that AARP is watching right now that our listeners might be interested in.
Yes. In fact, I wanted to mention that we are about to endorse the 2 tax credit bills that Senator Young mentioned that he's sponsoring, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act and the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. Will be we're also have already endorsed a couple of other bills. One that Senator Young is a co-sponsor of is the Reforming Disaster Recovery Act. And this bill would address long delays in getting funds from the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program to the people that need it. It's sponsored by Senator Schatz of Hawaii and Collins of Maine, and in the House by Representative Green of Texas. This program provides flexible long-term assistance to states, tribes, and local governments to help rebuild housing and infrastructure after a disaster. But right now, the program isn't authorized, so every disaster requires a new act of Congress and new regulations from HUD. But this bill would permanently authorize it, expediting the delivery of critical funds for repair and construction. It also creates a reserve fund to disperse funds, the initial funding more quickly, and maintains the requirement that low and moderate income households receive 70% of the funds. And another bill that we have endorsed is the Rural Housing Service Reform Act to address the housing crisis in rural America. And this bill would make much needed improvements to the Section 515 rural rental program and other rural housing service programs. It's sponsored by Senator Smith of Minnesota and Rounds of South Dakota, and in the House by Missouri Representatives Lupton-Meyer and Cleaver. Right now, over half of Section 515 assisted households are older adults or people with disabilities. And but the property owners are leaving it as their contracts are expiring or as they prepay their mortgages. And when this happens, tenants are threatened with steep rent increases or having to find new housing. One of the most significant reforms to the bill is to decouple the Section 515 mortgages and the 521 rental assistance so that tenants are not subject to large rent increases when owners pay off their mortgages. The bill also makes it easier to transfer properties to nonprofits when the owners leave the program, and it increases the set-aside for nonprofits. It also includes Native American community development financial institutions in the section in the direct loan program that will help address the lack of home lending in Indian country. So these are just a couple of the other bills that we've been working on. These are bills that will hopefully be included in any housing package that is promoted through the Senate Banking Committee, and we're hoping for some movement again after in the lame duck.
Wonderful. Thank you, Deborah, and thank you for all of your hard work on these issues. We know that we have a big champion in you and our federal team on these housing issues when you all are up on the Hill. And with that, you all, we have reached our quick 30 minutes on housing this morning. It went by super fast, but I'm going to encourage you to go to a couple of places to get some more information on everything housing that AARP is working on and everything that AARP is doing here in Indiana. You can go to our website at aarp.org/in, or you can always call us at 866-277. I'm sorry, let me repeat that again. 866-227-7457. Again, that's 866-227-7457. For those of you that have been watching via video, you've seen a little QR code pop up several times where you can sign up to be an AARP activist. That's where you're going to get information and action alerts around particular pieces of legislation. So you can give that a scan before you leave us today. We do want to thank Senator Young for joining us today. I can't imagine what it's like to have a schedule of a senator, but he was able to give us a little bit of his time. He did mention if you have questions or want to talk more about housing, you can always reach out to his office. He mentioned www.young.senate.gov, and he also mentioned a 202, or maybe he didn't mention this, but I'm going to mention it. The 202-224-5623 telephone number. Again, that's 202-224-5623. Want to thank you all for joining us today. I know it was a fast and furious call about housing, but it is an important issue that AARP is working on and one you should stay tuned on. I will say that it looked like there were some questions that came in around property taxes, which is more of a state level issue. And I would say that that is something that AARP Indiana is going to be watching during the coming state legislative session here in Indiana. So I would encourage you to follow us on social media, get us online to see what we're up to related to property taxes. And with that, I'm going to let you all enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.